Hello, this is Sean Briscoe, and in today's presentation I will discuss two things that I think a lot of debaters actually overlook and do not take advantage of as much as they could. Cross-examination and establishing ethos or credibility in a debate round. Aristotle, writing on rhetoric and the art of persuasion, identified three keys to your ability to persuade an audience. The first of those is logos, or the ability to construct logical argumentation, to have things that people who are listening to you recognize as being sound logic and developed well. That's primarily what we talk about when we use the structures that we teach you in policy debate, whether it be the stock issues for constructing an affirmative case, or the key elements of a disadvantage, or what have you. And primarily, judges focus on argumentation in policy debate, at least quote-unquote professionally trained debate judges focus almost exclusively on that element of persuasion. But that doesn't mean that the other aspects of persuasion that Aristotle talks about are irrelevant or unimportant. They do make a difference. Pathos refers to the idea of whether or not the speaker cares about the attitudes, the beliefs, or the individual who's listening. Right? Do you have their interests in mind when you are trying to persuade them? And we do that in a debate round by understanding what our judges' judging paradigm is, or the perspectives that they bring into a debate. And I'll talk about that in a future presentation. But then ethos is simply your credibility as a speaker. How believable are you? And there are a number of different things that you can do to establish credibility. And the reason why I incorporate cross-examination into this presentation is because cross-examination actually plays a pivotal role in your ability to create ethos in the mind of the judge, or to demonstrate ethos. So let's look at cross-examination specifically. I think there are 5 major reasons for cross-examination in a debate round. The first, and probably the most important, is it is the opportunity to clarify misunderstood points or missed points. So things that you didn't get down, or things that you're not clear about. This is your opportunity to ask the speaker what they meant or what they said. Okay? You cannot debate the things which you do not understand or that you missed. So you need to take advantage of that opportunity. Now, I think that's that highlights or hints at another thing that should be brought up at this time. And that's that a lot of beginning debaters and even a lot of beginning coaches think that cross-examination is a time for you to make arguments, but it's not. Cross-examination is an opportunity for clarification. Okay, academic debate is a very structured activity which allows each of the speakers to have their own point in time to develop their ideas free from interruption, and it fosters critical listening skills and those sorts of things. And so we don't actually carve out time in cross-examination to allow the two speakers to yell at one another or to argue with one another, to disagree with one another. It's really designed purely to ask the speaker about things that you may be misunderstood. Second, we use cross-examination to ensure that our opponents are taking a stand, or maybe just to clarify what their stance in the debate round was. There are a number of debaters, particularly newer debaters, who for whatever reason are wishy-washy in their presentations. They don't assert themselves, they don't tell the judge exactly what they stand for. And so in cross-examination, you can ask questions to find out what their stance in the debate round is or is going to be. If your opponents in cross-examination refuse to take a stand, I would say that probably makes it more difficult for them to win the round. Not only is it going to probably become an ugly round if your opponents don't take a stand, but as you start asking questions about what their stance is, and that speaker refuses to identify their stance, the judge is probably going to have a relatively low opinion of them. And even if they're a strict flow judge, it will probably impact the speaker's credibility later in the round, or impact how they view your responses and their responses to you. And probably will help you actually in the end of the debate. Third, you can use cross-examination to set up arguments. You don't, like I said, use cross-examination as a time to make arguments, but you can ask questions which help you to set up the links to arguments or help you to identify gaps in the logic of your opponents or gaps in the storytelling of your opponents so that you can set up arguments that you will deliver in the later speeches in the round. Another main reason for cross-examination is that your partner needs prep time. You use those 3 minutes to give your partner 3 minutes of prep time. One of the worst things you can do to your partner is to feel like you no longer have any questions to ask or you don't know what to ask, and so a minute or a minute and a half before time has expired, you just say, no further questions, and you sit down. You just cost your partner a minute or a minute and a half of prep time. So even if you're out of ideas, even if you don't know what else to ask, fill up cross-examination time. Ask questions you already know the answers to. Yes, you might have a minor bump down in terms of your credibility because the judge might be sitting there and thinking, how did you not get that, or how did you not understand that? But the point is that that's not the only thing that you're concerned with. Your partner's ability to have an organized and well thought out speech is important, and so you want to use up all of that prep time, all of that cross-examination time so that they can prep. And then fifth, cross-examination is an opportunity for you to establish ethos directly in comparison to the person on the other side of the aisle from you. And so display confidence during that cross-examination period. Whether you're asking questions or you're answering questions, you want to show the judge that you are confident in the things that you're saying. And also demonstrate that you understand your case and your arguments, or understanding of your opponent's arguments. And that's even if you don't necessarily have understanding, if you don't necessarily know what they're talking about. Now, you don't want to try and pull the wool over your opponent's eyes, so to speak, or over your judge's eyes, so to speak, but you do want to demonstrate that you're confident and that you can think through these issues. And a big part of having credibility then is just acting like you're not afraid or overly concerned about the things that are happening in the debate round. Just stay calm, cool, and collected, and you'll do fine. So 4 simple things to remember in terms of approaching cross-examination. One is that you should always enter a cross-examination period with a specific goal in mind. What are you hoping to accomplish during that cross-examination period? That piece of advice is actually aimed more at the varsity debaters than it is to a beginning debater, because I think in the beginning stages of your career, you really are just focusing on, the primary purpose is going to be, I missed a lot of stuff and I need to get some clarification and fill in the gaps. But as you get more experience, then you can start to think about, okay, what were some of the key flaws in my opponent's case? What are some of the flawed assumptions that they're making? And then you can start to highlight those so that you can establish strong arguments in the next speech. But the bottom line, have a goal in mind and then work towards that goal during cross-examination. Second, phrasing is important. You should not really be trying to get a specific response from your opponents. You don't want to, you can ask leading questions in debate rounds, but don't be so stuck that you try and force your opponents into a specific type of response, or into a specific response. You want to give them some freedom and flexibility to actually clarify what they mean so that we can have a good debate. Also, I think it's a big mistake to try and force your opponents into yes or no answers. I know a lot of times you want a yes or no answer because that'll make your job easier, but a lot of things simply cannot be answered with yes or no. There's nuance. And to be honest, if you want to have a good debate, if you want to have the best chance of winning, you want to truly understand where your opponents are coming from. And in order to understand where they're coming from, you might need more than a simple yes or a no answer. You should also know when to stop. Sometimes your opponents will just start wasting your time and you don't really go anywhere. So if you've asked a question and your opponents start to ramble without clearly answering anything, it's probably a good idea to move on to a new subject. unless you're wanting them to ramble because you're just giving your partner prep time. But by and large, if they're starting to ramble, move on to another subject. If you have to repeat the question more than once, so it's okay to ask the question and then you don't really get the answer that you were looking for, or they misunderstood the question, or they say, I don't understand, what do you mean by that, or could you repeat the question? Go ahead and repeat the question once. Phrase it differently to see if maybe that helps you get to the answer that you're looking for, or to get the information that you're looking for. If they still are confused, if they're still not getting it, just move on to another question. Or if they're just rephrasing the question that you've asked and pointing it back to you, you've probably hit a wall and it's time to move on to something else. But then the fourth thing to remember about cross-examination is you need to follow up on what happens in cross-ex. Okay? In the debate world, we say that cross-examination is not flowed. What that means is judges who are quote-unquote professionally trained judges do not take notes during cross-examination. They're not putting down on paper the things that were said in cross-ex. So that means no matter what was said in cross-examination, there isn't an actual argument being made. It's not going to necessarily impact the judge's decision until you follow up on it in a speech. And you would do that by saying, in cross-examination, they told us X. That opens the door for the link on the disadvantage, which is this. Okay, you have to follow up on the things that happen in cross-examination, or they really do not matter in the debate. So let's talk a little bit about some stylistic hints for both the person who's answering questions and the person who's asking the questions. I think it's important for you to be bold and aggressive. You want to show that you're confident. You want to show that you believe that you're in charge and that you can win this debate round, but you don't want to be bossy. You don't want to be a jerk. You don't want to quote-unquote lay the smack down on your opponents or anything like that. That just comes off as rude and mean-spirited, and most judges won't actually like to see that happening. Okay, so don't undermine your credibility. Don't undermine the judge's perception of you. You want to just simply demonstrate that you are confident and that you're willing to be bold. Part of that is being in control, but at the same time, staying relaxed. Whether you're asking the questions or you're answering the questions, staying relaxed will help to show that you're confident. Staying controlled and not shaking, not stammering a lot, not getting upset. Remaining in control of your emotions and in control of the situation will again help to show that you are credible in that debate round. Be cooperative, not provocative. Work with your opponents. The best debates, the most fun debates, and the clearest debates are the ones in which the four debaters are cooperating with one another to have a more clear debate and a better debate. Simply trying to provoke your opponents and rile them up and get them into arguments and those sorts of things tend to actually undermine the debate in so many different ways. And it's usually counterproductive to the goals of the debate round, to including winning the debate round. You want to work with your opponents. This one is more of a preference from my perspective. I know a lot of times when I go to debate round, or when I judge debate rounds, speakers, whether it's at start of cross-examination or at the start of their speech, will look around and ask if everyone's ready to go. Judge, are you ready? Opponents? Partner? Honestly, it just seems disruptive to the flow of things. I think you're much better off to just look around. If people are looking at you and they've got their pens at the ready, they're ready to go. So it's okay to go ahead and start the cross-examination period or the speech if you're talking about a speech. If people are writing, then wait for a second. If they're continuing to write and it seems like maybe too much time has passed, it's okay to say, when everyone's ready, or are you ready, or something like that. That's okay. But for the most part, if people are looking at you, then they're ready, and go ahead and start. I would say stand next to your opponent. I see an awful lot of debates where people sit down at their desk. They don't bother to stand up next to their opponent during the cross-examination period. Yes, especially on the national circuit or in college, that's not really going to hurt you to stay at your seat and not stand up next to your opponents. But I do think that by and large, with the vast majority of judges who are out there, showing that respect for your opponent by standing next to them will help you to have credibility in the debate round and will just make you more likable in the minds of the judge. It also makes it seem like you're more professional, and so it doesn't hurt anything to stand up, so I don't know why you wouldn't stand up. That's not to say that I've always stood up in cross-examination back when I was a debater. There were times that I sat at my desk, and that's okay. But for the most part, I think it's important to stand next to your opponent, show that you're being professional, show that or demonstrate respect for your opponent, and move forward from there. Look at the judge during cross-examination. You're not in an argument or a debate with your opponent. You're not trying to persuade your opponent to vote for you. You're not really talking to your opponent. You're actually speaking to your audience. The audience is your judge. That's the person who you want to vote for you, so that's who you should be looking at. Now, it seems a little bit awkward, I suppose, for you to always just stare at your opponent. So what I used to do as a competitor, if I was asking questions, I would turn my head, I would have my body facing the judge, and I would turn my head to my opponent as I asked the question. Once I was finished with the question, I would turn and I would look at the judge while my opponent answered the question. And the same was true when I was answering questions. I would stand with my body facing the judge. I would look at my opponent while she asked me questions. Once she was done, then I would turn to the judge and I would give my answer. Okay, so looking at the judge for the most part during cross-examination will help you to establish a connection with your judge. Some specifics about approaching cross-examination when you are the questioner, when you're standing up to ask questions of the person who just spoke. Avoid theatrics. This is not the time to be melodramatic or to make a big show of different things in the debate. Most judges see that as being disingenuous, and it actually undermines your credibility, so just avoid them. Also avoid editorials and arguments. Remember, cross-examination is not a time for you to make arguments and to disagree with your opponent. It's an opportunity for you to ask clarifying questions. So don't stand up and start making arguments, start pointing out different statistics and those types of things. Simply ask questions. Also, don't demand unreasonable responses from your opponents. To some extent, that goes back to the yes or no the yes or no questions that I mentioned in a previous slide. Like I said, most things have nuance, right? Your opponents may need to give further explanations. So don't demand an unreasonable response from them. It will actually tend to make judges arch their eyebrow and wonder what's wrong with you rather than wondering what's wrong with your opponents. Maintain control. Be calm, cool, and collected. Avoid this as my cross-ex. This is a thing that usually happens. If you think about what's supposed to happen in cross-examination, one person is asking questions, the other is answering questions. So whoever just delivered a speech is answering questions, and a member of the other team stands up to ask questions. Every once in a while, you'll get into a situation where the person who is supposed to answer questions will ask a question back. I think that it's abrasive and abrupt for you to say something like, "This is my cross-ex," which I have seen so many debaters do over the years. I think what you ought to do is just think a little bit. Why did they ask me that question? Because oftentimes, if you actually think about it, one of two things has happened. Either they're actually answering your question with a question. It's a rhetorical question or something like that, and so they may have actually given you an answer. But second, sometimes they're actually asking the question to get some additional clarification so they can find out what it is that you're getting at. And so it seems really silly then for you to say, "This is my cross-ex, I'll ask the questions here," if it seems clear that they're trying to help the debate move forward. Okay, if they really are starting to ask you questions about your case and those, well, okay, let me step back a second too. Sometimes they may need to ask you a question about, well, what was the link on the disadvantage, or what did you mean by the link on the disadvantage? That actually can be a very important question because depending on what your question was, they may need the answer to that follow-on question in order to give you the answer that you're looking for, okay? So you can think through and go, okay, does that make sense or not? If they really are starting to shift their cross-examination around and putting you on the defensive, then it's okay to say, thanks, let's go ahead and move on to the next subject. And if they press on it, you can just say, just as a reminder, it is my cross-examination period and I have a couple other things I'd like to talk about. That's okay. If someone starts to ramble, if they're taking the opportunity to just go on and on and on and not really answer your question, it's okay to politely interrupt them and say, thanks, I think I understand. I'd actually like to move on to a different issue, or there are some other things that I'd like to address. It's okay to do that. Just don't be abrasive or abrupt with it. Try and find a nice break between sentences that you can interject on. And then lastly, don't use terms that you don't understand. If your opponents are saying things in their speech that you really don't get, that don't make sense to you, don't start using those terms and trying to pass it off as though you know what they're talking about. Ask for a definition. Ask them what they mean by it. That's important for a couple of different reasons. One, again, like I said before, you can't debate the things that you don't understand, so you need an answer to it. Second, you will start to look silly if you start using terms that you don't understand, and the judge will see that you don't understand. And third, this one can be really helpful for you. You might find out that your opponents don't understand either. And if they don't know, it's going to make it really difficult for them to win the debate round, and it will actually be a crushing blow to their ethos in the round. So when you're answering questions, some things for you to keep in mind. Again, first and foremost, be confident. Display that confidence in the round. Avoid saying things like, my partner will bring that up later. If they've asked you for something, if they've asked you for a statistic or a specific piece of evidence or something like that, don't commit your partner to reading a piece of evidence later on. Why? Because they might not make an argument that requires you to read that evidence, right? So why would you commit yourself to making arguments or reading evidence that they're not actually requiring you to do in their speech time? So don't commit yourself to reading that evidence. Now, if you have a flow judge, a quote-unquote professionally trained judge, so former debater or someone like that, they're not going to expect you to read that evidence unless your opponents make an argument anyway, right? But if you have a lay judge, if you have a community member who's not really familiar with debate, they might start to question, hey, you said you were going to read this piece of evidence in a later speech and you didn't. Why is that? And then you might end up losing the round on an argument that was never made. So instead of saying, my partner will read that later, or I will read that later, try responding with, well, would you like me to look that up for you? Sure, we have that piece of evidence. Would you like to see it right now? Would you like me to read it right now? And if they say, no, read it in your next speech, please, you could say, well, I could hand it to you if you'd like, but unless you're making an argument in your speech, I probably won't read it. And so it's okay to kind of explain why you're not going to read that evidence or not commit yourself to it. Minimize tag team cross-examination. Tag team cross-examination is where both people are asking questions or both people are answering questions. Meaning the affirmative just gave the 1AC and the negative asks questions. Both the first affirmative speaker and the second affirmative speaker chime in and answer the question. That would be a tag team cross-examination. Or both speakers from the negative team are asking questions of the speaker. That also is tag team cross-examination. Some judges just flat out refuse to accept tag team cross-examination. They believe it's unprofessional, they believe it's a violation of the rules, and you should never do it. Okay, with those judges, obviously you should not do tag team cross-ex. But even if you have a judge who says tag team cross-ex is legitimate or doesn't make a statement on what they believe about tag team cross-ex, I think that you should minimize the amount of tag team. Why is that? Well, one, it's important, I think, to have both speakers have the ability to chime in, because if cross-examination's primary purpose is to clarify the debate, to make sure that we have a better debate, if something is unclear, then I sure as heck want both speakers chiming in so that we can all understand the answer clearly. But at the same time, you don't want it to appear that your partner doesn't know what he's doing. you don't want to undermine his credibility as a speaker. And so minimize the amount of tag team cross-examination or a tag team that occurs in cross-ex. What I used to do as a debater, if I heard a question from our opponents and my partner answered it, and I always let my partner have first stab at answering a question. That's part of minimizing tag team cross-ex. Let your partner have first stab at answering the question. If it appeared that the answer was either incomplete or that you think your partner misunderstood the original question, then go ahead and chime in. But be as brief as you possibly can. Okay? That's what I mean by minimizing the amount of tag team cross-ex. Okay, that then brings us to some difficult cross-examination situations. Some interactions that could be problematic. Every once in a while, someone will ask you a question and you just don't know the answer to it. It's okay to say, I don't know. In fact, we're far better off, and you are far better off, acknowledging that you don't know rather than trying to wiggle your way through and just try and trick everyone into thinking, because it will become clear that you don't really understand, and that will undermine your credibility. But being willing to say, I don't know, and saying that in a very confident way shows that you're not afraid of the fact that you don't know something. And it also allows you to explore the idea further on and develop answers and develop understanding as the debate progresses. It's also okay to admit mistakes. Sometimes things will happen in a debate round that you just realize you made a mistake, and it's okay in cross-examination to admit that mistake. I'm going to point out an example from my debating career where I made a huge mistake. I was the first negative speaker for a while during my freshman year in college, and we were in a debate round, and I really thought that I heard in one of the advantages of the affirmative case that they promoted economic development. It wasn't the tagline of the card, it wasn't the main thrust of the card, but I thought that in the middle of the development of the analysis within that quotation, within that piece of evidence, I thought that I heard something about economic development. And so I pulled out a disadvantage that we had that talked about why economic development was bad. Okay? And it was a really long disadvantage too, unfortunately, so I spent a significant portion of the 1NC reading that argument. The very first question in cross-examination was, okay, you run this disadvantage based on the fact that we promote economic growth. Where in the world do you get your link on the disadvantage? And I was like, well, in your advantage 1, you read this piece of evidence and it talks about economic development. And he goes, I don't think so. What card are you referring to? And so I said, well, it was the B card in the advantage. And he goes, yeah, we don't claim economic advantage. And I said, well, I know you don't claim it, but it's in the card. He says, no, it doesn't. And I said, can I see the 1AC? So he hands me the 1AC, and I skim through the card. And I go, oh, I don't see anything about economic growth and economic development. And so I briefly skim through the other cards in that advantage, and I realize they don't have anything in that advantage talking about economic growth. So I look at him and I say, you're right. You don't promote economic growth. This disad doesn't apply in the debate round. We'll go ahead and kick it. Meaning, we'll drop the argument. We won't go for it. And he goes, what do you mean? I'm like, I thought I had a link to the disadvantage, and I clearly don't, so it's not relevant to the debate. We'll kick out of it right now. We actually went back 3 or 4 times because he was so incredulous and didn't trust me that I was actually going to kick out of that argument. He finally just said, so you're saying my partner doesn't have to answer this argument in the next speech? I was like, that's absolutely correct. We will not bring this argument back up again. And it's okay to admit a mistake. Demonstrate that mistake. It also shows confidence when you do that, and you can move forward and have a much better debate. What happens when you have someone, either the questioner or the person answering the questions, gets overly aggressive? They start getting mean-spirited, they start trying to bully you around, and those types of things. The worst thing you can do is respond to them in kind, to have a tit-for-tat reaction, because that just leads to escalation, and people get mean and nasty, and judges dislike it. So if you have someone who's being overly aggressive, the first step is to have a surprised look on your face. Demonstrate a little bit of shock, like, oh my goodness, what's going on here? That will highlight for you, or for the judge, excuse me, that what is going on right now is a little bit uncalled for and out of line. And typically, your judges will actually respond in much the same way. So have that surprised look like, oh my goodness, what's going on? But stay calm and cool yourself. Just press forward. Then, one of the tricks that I always used as a debater and have always recommended for my students is that if they continue to be aggressive, sometime when your judge is looking down at their notes or maybe writing on the ballot, take a half step backwards so that you're a little bit further away from the judge and your opponent is a little bit closer. That does a couple things for you. One, it brings their verbal aggression into the physical realm. It actually makes them look bigger and even more aggressive in the mind of the judge, which then makes it really look like they're being a bully, that they're being unreasonable from the perspective of the judge. Sometimes it even creates a situation where the judge feels like the person is actually being aggressive towards him or her, that they're being aggressive towards the judge, and that will certainly undermine their credibility as well. The bottom line in all of that is to remain calm, be poised, be pleasant, look innocent. Do not jump in and be overly aggressive yourself. Just stay calm, and you will have credibility in the mind of the judge. So again, Aristotle's keys to argumentation, and I put this slide in mostly as a bridge, as a transition, because now I'm going to talk a little bit just about ethos specifically. Again, logos is your logic. That's your arguments. Are they well structured? Do they have good supporting analysis and evidence and those types of things? Do you connect the dots for your judge? Pathos is the emotional appeal to the judge. If you know what the judge's paradigm is, if their judging philosophy is, how they approach debate, then you can adapt to them. And then ethos is your credibility or believability as a speaker, and you demonstrate that primarily through your personality and your attitude in the debate round. So looking a little bit about some things that you can do in round to establish that credibility. One of them is simply knowing your terms. Know the things that know what the concepts are that you're talking about. If you're talking about hegemony, you had better know that hegemony means or refers to a country's ability to influence other nations in the world. If you're talking about a federalism disadvantage, make sure that you know that federalism is the concept of a division of power between the national and the state governments, and reserving powers for each of those spheres of influence, or for those two different levels of actors. Know what the terms are, know what they mean, and know how to use them properly. Know your files. Know where things are. If you look unorganized, if you look haphazard, if you look like you're really confused and can't find things, that's going to undermine your credibility with the judge. Your delivery is important. Do you sound polished? Are you enunciating properly? Are you pronouncing things correctly? All of those will impact your judge's perception of you. Even if they are a strict flow judge, if you start mispronouncing words, at some level, even if it's at the subconscious level, it does undermine your ability to win that round. It doesn't prevent you from winning the round, but it's going to make it harder. So make sure that you know how to pronounce things, that you enunciate clearly, and so forth. If you have a lay judge, make sure that you're establishing eye contact with your judge as well, that you're not just reading off the page, that you can look at them during your speech. If you have a college debater or a coach who's okay with speed in a debate round, make sure that you're still clear. If you're slurring your words, if you're stuttering through things, if you're breathing audibly, it makes it appear that you haven't really put in research, or you haven't put in the time and to be prepared for that debate round. You want to have a clear delivery if you want to have credibility in the mind of the judge. And that will ultimately help you maybe not win the round outright, but it will impact the judge's perception of you when it comes to evaluating some of the subjective things in debates, like did you actually answer that argument? Is that a new argument in rebuttals or not? And are you allowed to make a cross-examination from something? I don't see that directly on my flow here, but you did talk about it someplace else earlier in the round. Some of those things that are subjective in the minds of the judge, if you have a clear delivery, you're more likely to have the judge side with you at the end of the debate. Again, be confident as you deliver. Demonstrate some teamwork. with your opponents. Again, I'm not going to talk about tag team a lot, but showing that you're working with one another can actually in many ways help you. But if you're talking over your partner, if you're not allowing your partner to answer questions or ask questions, that will undermine the credibility of both of you in the round. Prompting your partner during a speech. Some judges, again, absolutely refuse to allow prompting. Most judges will allow at least sticky notes or papers to be passed, although I have seen a couple of judges who thought that that was not allowed either. Why, I don't know, but they do. Some judges, especially on the national circuit, are okay, or college debaters, things like that, are okay with prompting your partner, verbally saying something as your partner is delivering their speech. I would say that you want to, if you're going to prompt your partner, be as brief as possible. Don't actually try and give an entire argument and then have your partner repeat that. That's a little bit too much. But to say something like, go to the disad, extend the turn, that I think is an okay type of a prompt that won't undermine your credibility. Even with some of those judges who think that you should never prompt your opponent, honestly, just go to the turn probably will get overlooked. Use we language when you're talking about things. It seems silly, but especially with lay judges, if you say things like my partner, my partner, my partner, that can be useful, but it can also seem sterile. Saying things like we contend, or we tell you, or Marshall tells you, Sarah tells you, that level of personal connection, oftentimes with lay judges, will actually go a long way towards helping your credibility in the debate round. Build on each other. Don't just repeat each other. Reach back, and don't forget about your partner's contributions to the debate round either. Actually reference the things that your debate partner said. And again, that goes to the we language. We say this, or Marshall said this in the last speech, and then I'm going to extend upon it in this way. Show that you're working with your partner in the debate round. Be organized. One of the things that can certainly tank your credibility is to be disorganized, not be able to find different pieces of evidence during a speech, or to have your flows out of order and those types of things. You want to be organized. You want to demonstrate that you're prepared to give your speech, and if you do that, then you will have more credibility. You want to balance evidence versus analysis in your speeches. Yes, the 1AC and the 1NC are almost exclusively comprised of quotations, of cards. But after those two speeches, you should have a decent amount of analysis in your speeches. Show that you are injecting yourself into the debate round rather than just relying on cards. Be sincere. Don't be untruthful. You want to show that you're making an honest effort in the debate round, that you're actually trying to work with your opponents. Be enthusiastic. Show that you want to be there. Even with college coaches and college judges, being enthusiastic and showing that you want to be there will make the debate round more fun, will make it more lively, will ultimately impact your credibility in the round in a positive way. Demonstrate that you're competent and be honest. Don't fall into the trap of just disagreeing with everything, even when you have to, especially when it means that you're doing something absurd or you're saying something absurd in the debate round. Okay, be honest and be sincere as you approach the debate round, and you'll put yourself in a good position with the judge. But then there's some things that go beyond just you in that debate round. There is an element of external ethos that is generated and created outside of the debate round itself. And some of that comes from you, but honestly, some of it comes from your school, or probably more correctly, the people that you associate with in between rounds at the debate tournament. Past success can actually impact your credibility in debate rounds. Like it or not, rightly or wrongly, past success does impact your ethos. Many times that's an unfortunate byproduct of the activity, or it's almost always an unfortunate byproduct, I think. But past success breeds more success. People see you as being a winner, or see you as not winning, not being credible, and that can undermine you or negatively impact you at some of the subjective elements or at the subjective levels of debate. So that's just an unfortunate thing. But if you're working hard, if you're doing things to grow and get better, then that's going to help you as you move forward in debates. But even bigger than that is your behavior, before, during, and after the round? Are you demonstrating sportsmanship? Are you being a good sport, or are you being a bad loser, or even a bad winner? Showing that you have concern for your opponents, that you care about them, that you want to work with them, I think will go a long way towards helping you to be liked by judges. And if you're liked by judges, they're more willing to vote for you. And so, yeah, when you win and when you lose, you should be gracious in the winning and in the losing. If your judges are giving oral critiques, you should listen to those oral critiques. Listen to the critiques that your opponents that your judge is giving to your opponents. Okay, demonstrate that you have concern and that you're wanting to grow in the activity. Like I said, be a good sport. Personal conduct, especially when you have lay judges, but really pretty much all. I mean, if coaches are the ones judging, if they see you running through the halls and being disrespectful of the tournament location, that could come back to haunt you later on. Parents, of course, could get really upset by that, just thinking that it's unprofessional. But coaches know there's a lot on the line in order for us to be able to open up our schools to have tournaments, and they're not going to like you very much if they see you mistreating property in the school and being disrespectful. So just be aware of the space that you're in and help take care of it. Personal appearance impacts your credibility as well, particularly on lay judge circuits. Competitors dress up, look professional, look like they're going to a professional job interview or something like that, to have that credibility. Not looking sloppy. Even on the national circuit, I know on the national circuit, we like to not dress up. We like to stay casual and comfortable, and that's okay. But I will say two things. One, don't be sloppy, because being sloppy can still undermine you. It's okay to dress down, I think, in tournaments, especially on the national circuit, but looking sloppy will undermine your credibility. But second, will it really hurt you to dress up? I would say that it's extremely rare for someone to think that you're not credible because you dressed up a little bit, but it's a lot more likely that someone votes you down or doesn't evaluate your arguments fully because they don't think that you're being professional. So I would say err on the side of dressing up, even if on the national circuit that means that you're not, like, you don't necessarily have to wear a suit and those sorts of things, but looking nice can still be